Welcome and thank you for joining us for today's HIS Talk webinar, Ransomware in Healthcare, Tactics, Techniques, and Responses. It's brought to you by HIS Talk. I'm Lori from HIS Talk and I'll be moderating. Our presenter today is John Gomez. John is currently the CEO of Sensato, a cybersecurity and privacy healthcare company, Jago Labs, which is a product design and management consulting firm, and Group Espada, which provides counterterrorism services. I'll hand it over to you, John.
Great, thank you very much. So I truly appreciate everybody taking time on a Friday to come and hopefully talk a little bit about this and learn a little bit. Certainly looking forward to your questions towards the end. Before we get into the subject matter, I'd really like to take a moment to thank HIS Talk for facilitating this. Just so everybody knows, I mean, we kind of had a very quick conversation on the state of the industry and ransomware, and HIS Talk was very fast to respond and say, look, we got to do something, and let's put this webinar out there. So truly want to recognize what they've done and bringing us together and providing this forum. So with that, just a little bit about me. As Lori mentioned, I'm the CEO of Sensato. If you need to get in touch with me, the information will be in materials that you receive. So that's kind of the ability for you to follow up a little bit. But with that, today we're going to talk about some of the background in ransomware, give you a little tour of some of the things that are going out there, show you some of the screenshots and actually how it takes place, how the attack actually is facilitated, and then we'll talk a little bit about strategy. I assure you from the get-go that we're not doing anything salesy here. This is really just practical information that hopefully either you already know, which would be great, or is informative and valuable to you in terms of something that you can put in place practically. So with that, let's get into it, and we'll see where it takes us. So the one thing I want you to understand, and some people may push back on this, but the absolute reality is that malware and ransomware is 100% preventable. That means that when we're talking about specifically ransomware and the attack vectors with that, how the attacks are taking place, we can look at those attacks and say, yeah, you know, these could have been prevented. Now I'm going to talk to you a lot more later on in the presentation around how you can prevent them and how you can get closer and closer to 100%. Obviously, healthcare is an extremely complicated industry with a plethora of competing challenges on the IT teams. But if this is a top 3 priority for a healthcare organization to assure they don't become a victim of ransomware, you can certainly take steps to prevent it. And most of it is going to be very straightforward, very low cost, and things that you can probably do on your own. So ransomware has certainly been around for quite some time. There's a variety of types. We're going to examine 2 or 3 of those today, which are the ones being used mostly against healthcare. And then we'll talk a little bit more about how to prevent it and what to do if you do become a victim of ransomware. But before that, I want to kind of make sure that we're all on the same page, give you some more insight into the types of ransomware, where it's come from, and help just kind of provide you a little bit more depth. And certainly the information on this presentation, one of the other goals I have is that you're able to take this information, utilize it as you wish to help educate your boards, your C-suite, whoever you feel within your organization needs to come up. So I've kind of put this together in a format that isn't too technical and can be utilized to help educate those in the organization that may be concerned about this topic. So ransomware's evolution has been around, goes back to the 80s, actually first started with consultants doing software development for clients and then being fearful they weren't going to get paid. So they would put time bombs in the code that after X amount of days, if they didn't remove the key, the code would not work any longer until they got paid. That kind of evolved into a litany of ransomware, starting with one called the AIDS ransomware, which we'll talk a little bit about, and then has continually evolved. And with each evolution of ransomware that we've seen, all the way up to the most current SamSam, the sophistication levels of ransomware have become extremely, extremely powerful. And so I'll take you through exactly what I mean by that and why they've become so sophisticated. They're not just very simplistic programs any longer. They're entire platforms with services and APIs and a variety of ways to execute them. There are 2 types of ransomware, and right now what we hear mostly of is the encrypting kind. But there is a non-encrypting version of ransomware. Simply stated, encrypting encrypts your files, non-encrypting does not. The encrypting genre of ransomware basically started in 1989 by a gentleman by the name of Joseph Pop, and when he was finally caught, he was declared mentally unfit to stand trial, not because he was truly unfit, but more so because they felt that how could somebody ever do something like this? You had to be crazy to do this to somebody. So in the end, he took a plea, didn't stand trial, and the money that he made from his victims was actually donated to AIDS research, and hence it was called the AIDS Trojan, and it's one of the earliest versions of encrypting ransomware. Now, on the non-encrypting side, we first started seeing this kind of an attack occur in around 2010, and it was attributed back to Eastern Europe, mostly Russian criminal organizations. The users are typically required to pay some type of ransom, just like as you would expect on the encryption side. But rather than encrypt your files, it'll do things to you. So it may flash pornography randomly on your screen. It may shut down certain services, such as communication services, or it may intermittently affect your keyboard access. The one thing to keep in mind here is that it's going to try to create anomalies that become annoying. So one thing, but they will always ask for money. So in either case, you're always being asked for money. The encrypting side is certainly more immediate in terms of the challenge that it poses. The non-encrypting, though, can become extremely challenging as well to an IT organization and the user base. So just a few facts on it. On the encryption side, from an attack perspective, we started out with 256-bit encryption. Today, the encryption that we're seeing is 2048 typically, which means for you to decrypt this would take an extreme amount of computing power to do it in any reasonable amount of time. And by reasonable, it's certainly not reasonable by healthcare standards. So once you're encrypted, you're pretty much encrypted, but the attackers are using the latest encryption security algorithms possible. The encryption itself does take time. And when we talk more about response, there's something for you to keep in mind, that this isn't a situation where suddenly you encrypt or you unleash the encrypting ransomware, and then 2 seconds later your entire organization is locked down. So it takes time to encrypt files, it takes computing power, and so the notion here is that you do have a little bit of time to react if you discover the attack, but that's going to require some very, very serious processes on your behalf. Encryption now is being focused on not only local computers, but we're seeing it now spread to encrypting entire networks and also making its way into the cloud. There are different types of ransomware for encryption purposes, where they are targeted, meaning they're targeting a specific operating system or a computing device. Random, which is basically you unleash it and it'll encrypt whatever it can. And then holistic, which is a combination of the two. You start out with targeting, but you also take advantage of any victims of opportunity that you can. So far, the people perpetrating these attacks have had a very high level of honor, meaning that if you pay, they give you the keys. In fact, their entire business model is based on the fact that you talk about, or the media talks about, that this organization was encrypted or attacked by ransomware. They paid, they got back their files. So if there's honor among thieves, it's these guys. On the non-encrypting side, like I said, we typically see this involve some type of pornography flashing on the screen. Interestingly enough, there's a case, only one that I know of, where the message, there was pornography wasn't displayed, but a message was displayed on the screen stating that the organization knew that you had child pornography on your computer, and the FBI, instead of prosecuting you, wanted a payment of $24,000 in retribution. And the person that got this message actually turned themselves into the FBI because they thought they were actually caught by the FBI. So one pedophile has been caught because of ransomware that we know of. So if there's any good in this, it's probably that. Non-encrypting ransomware often can be destructive in terms of that if you don't pay, it's going to do some amazingly dangerous things to your computer system. It's not just going to encrypt your files. Typically, we see that it does low-level file access and starts messing with BIOS. and potentially infecting controllers and other things. So non-encrypting ultimately can be extremely much more dangerous than encrypting in terms of the forensics we've seen. But right now, in terms of the industry, we're seeing more encrypting attacks. The important thing to keep in mind is the response to either one of these is going to be the same. Your strategy should be the same. There's very low-level honor with non-encrypting ransomware authors. We have seen situations where even though you pay, they still do damage to your machines. So there's some differentiators in terms of how we've seen these attacks take place, the technologies involved, and what they're targeting. There's some distinct advantages to ransomware attackers. There's no advantage to you as the victim, but for the attacker, there's no mules. There's no go-between. There's nobody that you're going to interact with, except now in SamSam, that's a little bit different, as I'll explain later. But for the most part, there are no mules as you would see in real life with a hostage situation. There's no personal information presented to you or to authorities that can be used to prosecute or convict or track down these individuals. There's a very high-value transaction. Deploying a ransomware attack platform and doing ransomware attacks is actually not that expensive to do. This doesn't require tons and tons of computers, doesn't require a lot of sophistication at this point in terms of the maturity of where we are as attackers. So the benefit is certainly on the attacker's side. They also have an extremely high level of control because once they have your system, they call the shots. There's very little they have to worry about in terms of negotiation. And it's an extremely automated workflow, which is something that I'll walk you through. And in some cases, if you're a technologist or a geek, you're going to say probably like, wow, that's pretty cool, because they have really thought out the actual workflows behind these attacks, and they're continuing to evolve in terms of how they manage their workflow for the attack. Some intelligence to give you in terms of what we've learned about ransomware in the past few months is that this is very much a real hostage situation. Now, I say that because we have heard or we've had dialogue with certain organizations within healthcare that say, well, if that happened to me, I'm not paying, or, if I get in touch with them, then, I'm sure I can negotiate this. This is a very real hostage situation, and if somebody was taking hostage in the human side, the physical side of the world, not the cyber, you would probably call the authorities and let them deal with the hostage situation. This is the same thing here. Call the authorities as soon as this occurs. We have one incident that we know of in 2015 where the organization decided not to pay and said, it wasn't a healthcare organization, but they decided not to pay. And the attackers did retaliate. They basically destroyed all of their systems. So you just need to keep in mind that, again, this is very real. It's not a game for the attackers, and they have no vested interest in caring about your situation. We are now seeing ransomware spread to Internet of Things. So if you have smart TVs, SCADA systems, CCTV cameras, basically IP-enabled, web-enabled devices, there's a chance that you can see this spread to those environments. And also to smartphones. We have not seen these attacks spread to smartphones or Internet of Things devices in healthcare, but we have seen it in a consumer market. Very, very low amount of attacks where we've seen televisions, somebody's home television has been encrypted and shuts down. We have seen one instance of a medical device compromised. I won't go much deeper into that, but to tell you that it was there was no effect to patient safety at any time. And it was probably the victim of the attack, meaning that the medical device was not targeted, but rather was on the network that the attack took place on. And because most medical devices are running either Windows and Linux operating systems, the ransomware was able to just encrypt that device. Again, there was no threat to patient safety, and it's something you can do. There's some things you can do to not assure that doesn't occur to you. But we have not seen any instances of targeted attacks against medical devices, and I just want to be very, very clear about that. So with that, I want to talk to you a little bit about the methodology, how this works, what it looks like, and give you some insight into that. Now, regardless of whether we're talking ransomware or any other type of cyber attack or cyber physical attack, there's a methodology that all attackers use. My organization and I, we're pretty much attackers. We look at everything from an attack perspective. So if we were to attack you, we would use and employ this methodology. This methodology is very similar to any of you that have been in the military and you begin thinking about attack planning or compromising a target of opportunity. First thing we do is mission planning. And yes, there is mission planning that takes place when these attackers execute an attack. They don't just randomly select someone. In most cases, they understand that target. They do intelligence gathering. Once they have their intelligence, they then look for vulnerabilities associated with that target. They then begin their attack modeling, which is very similar to what you would do in terms of threat modeling, except they're figuring out how to exploit you. Eventually, they infiltrate, they exploit, and then they exfiltrate, meaning they remove any as much possible information as they can on their way out, and then they review their missions. And the reason I'm presenting this to you is to really give you a clear understanding, again, that you're not dealing with people that just kind of do this for kicks or a bunch of script kiddies, but truly very sophisticated organizations that not only is their technology evolving, but their methodologies are also evolving. So let's talk a little bit about Locky. This is the ransomware that hit Hollywood Presbyterian, as best we know. So it starts out typically with an email. And I will give you a clue that because it starts out with an email, this is one of the reasons that I say it's 100% preventable. Now, whether you have the processes and procedures in place to assure this doesn't occur to you, that's a different discussion. But with the right processes and procedures, you can prevent the attack, or at least a Locky attack, delivered through phishing campaigns. So in this case, someone typically gets an invoice or something similar that says, we need you to pay this. And it can happen in any of the email systems, usually Google or Gmail or Outlook. The thing I want you to keep in mind is that intelligence has been performed, so the email is usually going to someone at the organization that would handle things like invoices. So again, you can start targeting education to users and saying, look, if you get an invoice and it's in a Word document, we don't want you to click on it. We don't care who it is that sent it to you. It could be our biggest fans or you know, our worst partner. But any kind of Word document, any kind of Office document, anything of that nature, just delete the email and call the person. And to avoid an attack, it can be that simple. Just simply instruct your operational people that, you know, do not open attachments unless you call someone and say, hey, you know, did you send this to me or not? So take a step to verify. I know that's not the easiest thing to do, but on the other hand, you know, your healthcare organization's under attack. So the choice as to whether this is too much of an inconvenience or not really is up to you. If the person does click on a link and they actually look at the invoice, it's going to open a Word file, whether it's in Gmail or Outlook. And that's what the Word file looks like. Your first reaction to this is going to be that, oh, it's blank. Your second reaction, if you're a technologist, may be like, oh, this is cool. They must have some hidden script inside this document, and you're at this point, you know, you've kind of been taken. It's not that sophisticated, and this is why user education is so important, and why I go back to the fact that this is preventable. At this point, even though you've opened the document, there's been no attack. Your machines aren't being encrypted. There's nothing running in the background. There's no hidden code. What happens is you'll either one of two things. Your user is going to reply back and say, hey, I got your invoice, but there's, you know, when I open it, there's nothing there. Or two, if they don't reply back, there's going to be a follow-up email that comes in saying, oh, by the way, you know, if nothing displays when you open the attached invoice, please hit the enable editing or enable macros button that gets displayed. So in either case, the attacker is using your employee to facilitate the attack. So even if you have protection in place, they're circumventing that simply by just getting your employee. And usually the email will say something like, well, for security purposes, we don't display the invoice information to protect your privacy, but if you enable editing or enable macros, then you'll see the information. We just wanted to make sure it was you that got this information and it inadvertently fall into the wrong hands. And most of your users are going to go, oh, thank you for thinking of me. These people are so nice. Let me see how to help them. And at that moment, when they hit enable editing or enable macros, the macros are going to run, and then your machine is beginning to be encrypted. So the very next thing that occurs is you probably are going to see a screen appear on the user's desktop that looks like this. Now, while they're reading this screen, in the background, the encryption is starting. And in most cases of what we've seen, the encryption starts locally, and also starts to look for possible network opportunities or attached storage opportunities, and begins to spread. But it usually starts locally, so you have a little bit of time at this moment. Now this screen typically will pop up, and the second thing that it'll do is also replace the user's wallpaper. So it becomes their wallpaper, so that the attackers make very sure that you see the instructions. The instructions are typically telling you a little bit about the cipher they're using and the level of encryption. They offer some helpful links to Wikipedia in case you aren't familiar with encryption and you can read about it. And they advise you that you can't decrypt anything without getting the keys from them. They also warn you that if you touch anything, delete files, rename them, try to do anything at all, that it could lead to some very dire consequences. So as part of an incident response, one of your rules should be don't touch anything. And instruct your users not to touch anything, but to probably call the IT organization. Now, the other thing they tell you is to download and install Tor. And then once you run Tor, you're going to go to the address in number 3, which is a very specific address for your organization's encryption attack. And then at that point, you'll follow the instructions on that website. Okay, so once we have that done, we'll show you here. You're seeing the names of the files being actually changed to an encrypted file format. If you open the file, it's just garbage at this point. So once that occurs, like I said, you're going to see this message, and you're going to probably download Tor and then go to their website. Now, when you go to their website, it helps you understand how do you go through this. And ultimately, what happens is you buy Bitcoins. There'll be an amount of money that you need to provide them. You give them the payment. They provide you a decryption key. And at that point, you apply the decryption instructions, and it decrypts your files. Now, I want you to understand that in most cases, when this occurs, it's not immediate. It could take anywhere from several minutes to several days to get that decryption information back to you. So you need to understand that even though you've paid, it may take 2 to 3 days for you to get back to a position where you can even start decrypting your files. So when we hear healthcare organizations are down from 5 to 7 days after an attack, many of the cases may be that they just haven't gotten the decryption information back. This is very important for you to understand in terms of your downtime planning. We've had a lot of situations where organizations say, well, we'll just go to paper, but most organizations are resilient on paper for about 24 hours. So you need to understand when it comes to an encryption attack, you may be down, or you may be on paper upwards of 48 to 72 hours, especially because you may not have the keys to decrypt before that time. So let's take another look at a different encryption method or encryption attack. This is CTB Locky. A little bit more advanced. Screens are a little bit nicer. What I'll draw your attention to is at the bottom of the screen, it says 955647, and that really is the amount of time that you have before you can no longer decrypt and you're done. So this organization, this attack style, actually imposes a time limit before you need, how quickly you need to respond. So they also kind of up the ante a little bit in terms of sophistication. In this case, they give you a set of files that you can test to decrypt. They randomly choose them. You don't get to choose. And so they'll let you try to decrypt a few files just to show you and prove to you that you can actually decrypt the files. Once you do that, and this is very wizard-like, so you click on Next. You put in your Bitcoin address and your information that they're asking you to pay for. The confirmation takes about 30 minutes just to get the confirmation back. And then again, it could take several days for you to get the actual decryption information. They're extremely helpful to the point that if you can't figure out how to do Bitcoin, they'll send you to an exchange and kind of help you understand how to do that. So those are kind of the attacks we've been seeing traditionally. They attack you, you pay, you move on. In all these cases, they've also used a human, they've targeted a human in order to execute the attack through a phishing campaign, okay? Now, that brings us to some new breed attacks. And that one we know of is called SamSam, which is server-based attack. We're looking now at things where we're seeing incremental attacks, where they focus on encrypting a few devices or a few network systems, They ask you for payment, and then if you don't pay, they take down everything. This is kind of a little bit friendlier attack because basically instead of taking down your entire organization, they're simply showing you what they could do. They take their payment, and hopefully you don't have to go to paper or bring your systems down. There is a new attack called a prolonged attack. This type of attack for encryption and ransomware is what we call a low and slow attack in terms of slang. And what this means is they encrypt a little bit of your system every so often. So this attack could be going on for a month to 3 or 6 or 7 months before you find out that it's there. Now the reason they do that is because they want to start encrypting your backup files. And so this is why recovery testing and making sure that you can actually recover from your backups is so critical. Because you may have a ransomware attack and then find out, okay, well, we're just going to go to our backups. And then you find out that your backups actually have been encrypted over time. So it's extremely important that you understand that these low and slow attacks actually are out there in the environment. Haven't heard of any of them specifically against healthcare, but we do know that they occur in other industries. So I'll talk to you through SamSam, and then we're going to switch over and talk a little bit more about prevention and what you can do to respond. SamSam is just a cartoon character, I believe, out of France. The key to this cartoon character is it doesn't know its own powers. I believe that's kind of why the attackers chose the name SamSam. They don't know their own powers. I guess it's a little tongue-in-cheek. SamSam does not target humans like the other attacks I showed you or reviewed with you do. There's no phishing campaign here. They target servers. They target specifically unpatched servers. So again, this is why I'm telling you this is 100% preventable. If your servers are patched, then frankly, they're not going to be able to get to you. And in SamSam's case, as of up until this week, those servers have been extremely specific servers that they're going after. Interestingly enough, SamSam is the first ransomware we've seen that actually has a built-in ability to negotiate the pricing. You can ask for bulk pricing instead of the standard pricing. So again, these guys are pretty serious, pretty sophisticated, and evolving their tactics and techniques. The interesting thing about that, though, is SamSam is the designers of SamSam know that they're going after very large targets and taking down a large amount of devices. Because the fact that they're even considering bulk pricing means that they already have anticipated the fact that in some cases it's going to be a pretty devastating attack. So the way SamSam works, and we'll get a little deeper into this than we did with the other reviews, is it finds a vulnerable server, such as JBoss. But don't get fixated on that. Don't just go, well, we're not running JBoss, so we're okay. Because these platforms can evolve. So they may just be looking for JBoss now, and next thing you know, they'll be looking for OWA or some other type of server that you have exposed. Once it gets onto your system, or once it gets through JBoss, it does what's called the deploy and scan, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a bit. And then they start encrypting, and then it self-destructs. And that self-destruct is just to get rid of the execution platform that was used to get into your server and start the encryption. It doesn't destruct your files. So to find JBoss is pretty simple. If I want to go out and find vulnerable JBoss servers on the internet, I can simply use this little URL here. We call this a dork. I won't go too deep into it, but there's a title, there's a version URL that I'm looking for. I put it into Google, and I'll get back a list of every vulnerable JBoss server across the web. If I now add a little bit of text to that in title command string and say something like, in text hospital or in text healthcare, I will then get a list of every healthcare organization throughout the world that has a vulnerable JBoss server. So the reason I'm telling you this is because many people I speak to when it comes to cybersecurity, even cybersecurity professionals, fail to realize that in many cases when we come after you as attackers, we're finding you just through very simple means, and you're broadcasting your vulnerabilities. Google's out there crawling your environment. When it crawls it, it not only just takes an indexing of your content, it takes an indexing of the application server, the operating system, the versions, and a variety of other things that are then used to attack you. So in the case of SamSam, first thing they do, they go out, they find servers within a particular industry, and they now know that you have this running, and they go ahead and use a known vulnerability to go against the server. If you just patch the server, then they move on to someone else. So the way this works is once SamSam gets in the server, they get a list of hosts, and they execute what we call lateral movement. Now, they use an executable for those that are a little bit more geeky called CSVDE, which is part of Microsoft Systems internals. And it comes up and gives them a list. Basically, they get an entire listing of your Active Directory. Once they have a list of that Active Directory, they begin mapping the network. They just use a simple PowerShell command script to execute a batch file. As they're going through, they ping each of your servers in your Active Directory. If it responds, it gets added to something called OK text. If there is no response from your server, it moves to a file called fail.txt. And what I want you to understand is this takes some time. So SamSam, in this case, has gotten through your vulnerable server. They're now looking at your Active Directory. They're going to go out and ping your environment. All of this is occurring before anything gets encrypted. So if you have the right controls and processes in place, you should be able to detect that somebody's on the inside of your network pinging and crawling your organization. This isn't like they get through the web server and 2 minutes later, boom, everything, game over. There is time here, and I keep bringing that up because that should help you formulate ideas around how to respond to this. So we talked about that it adds it to OK text. Once that's done, and they have a list of all your servers that they can ping, they go ahead and start generating public and private keys. They delete any shadow files so that they can get past their any kind of encryption or I'm sorry, any kind of backup strategy or cloning strategy you may have. Once that happens, they also start looking for locked files or backup files. If you have any files that are locked because they're in use or backup files on the network, they will kill those locked files using the kill proc APIs from Windows or the relevant APIs on Linux. I think for you to keep in mind is if you start hearing your users say, well, I was just using this and it quit all of a sudden, but then it was okay, I just rebooted it, that may be an anomaly that actually indicates an attack within your organization. So anytime you have users complaining about machines randomly shutting on and off, especially if it's a medical device, you should be looking at, is that indicative of some type of an attack? In this case, they get past any locked files. They want to be very clear, very certain that they're getting as much bang for their buck, if you will. Once they've gotten their files, they distribute the actual SamSam executable, and then they start encrypting. They start with files that are less than 100 megabits. Now, the reason they do this is because they're very fast to encrypt. They then break out files into different into different directories that they use within their application based on file size. So if a file is 250 megabytes, that's the second one they encrypt, and then it continues to build from there. Again, you have time. This isn't occurring overnight. It's occurring over a period of time. This is a low and slow attack. They've gotten in, they've scanned, they've cleaned up the environment to their liking, and now they're encrypting, starting with the smallest files and moving to the biggest. So not to be critical of anyone, but if you're in a situation where your database has been encrypted and so is everything else, that's probably taking some time to do. And you should think about how did they get that far before anybody learned about it. So they do negotiate. This is kind of a part of a transcript where it says you must send us 1 Bitcoin for each affected PC to receive a private key. In this case, it actually gives you the opportunity to go to their blog address. And this is their blog. You can leave some comments, and one of your comments can be like, oh, look, we can't afford 1 Bitcoin per PC. What can you do for us? They will then respond back to you and in some cases tell you, okay, well, give us 1 Bitcoin for every 10 PCs. Now, I'm not showing this to you because I would telling you that you should negotiate. Your first response should be, preserve what you can, contain the attack, notify the authorities, and then come up with a negotiation strategy with the authorities and allow them to be part of it so that they can help collect forensics and evidence. Keep in mind that as soon as this occurs, you have a criminal investigation that's going on, and there are certain things you have to comply with as part of that. And in this case, you can see that they said, for each affected PC, they changed their negotiation strategy. And there's no guarantee that they will negotiate with you. They may just decide to tell you no, and if you bother us again, it'll be 2 Bitcoins per PC. Some fun facts on SamSam for those of you that are into this. It's completely written in .NET. All the code to do the encryption and the distribution and reading Active Directory is an exact copy from MSDN sample code. So they basically went on Microsoft's site, took the examples that Microsoft provides on how to do encryption for legitimate purposes, or how to traverse a network or kill processes for legitimate purposes. Put it into their code, change the names, and that's about it. SamSam, like I said, self-destructs after encryption. It doesn't destruct your files, but it gets rid of itself so that you lose any opportunity for forensics. So let's talk a little bit about prevention and response and help you get some strategies of what you can do to prepare yourselves to prevent the situation or minimize it, and then respond to it if in fact it does occur to you, which hopefully it won't. Number one thing I see, not just with ransomware, but all security overall when it comes to cybersecurity, is detailed user education. Way too often I talk to organizations and people in the industry and they tell me, well, we're doing education. And the belief is that if you're doing like a HIPAA online training so you can check the box for OCR, ONC, that's education. That is not detailed user education. In this case, based on the information I gave you, if I'm you, I would be holding a lunch and learn or immediate meeting with my operations teams, HR, finance, purchasing, anyone who could be getting an email that says, you know, hey, we're checking on an employee that used to work with you, and so could you open up this form and just basically fill it out and give us your feedback on them over 2 minutes, or here's an invoice, or we're disputing this bill. Users need to clearly understand how these attacks work so that they don't become victims to them. So, you know, I'm a little passionate about this because it's such a cheap, easy thing to do to help drive down the effectiveness of this attack when it's a phishing campaign. That kind of is just mind-boggling to me that we don't do this as an industry at a much higher level. So it's got to be very detailed, highly focused. There is a protocol you can put in place called stop, drop, and roll. Same thing you would do for firefighting. And we named it purposely for that so that you remember it or your users remember it. If you are attacked by ransomware, this is what you should be hopefully communicating to your users. If they see that screen come up that says, boom, you know, you've been attacked, go download Tor, blah, blah, blah. Tell them to stop whatever they're doing and shut down the PC. Just turn it off, pull the plug, unless, of course, it impacts patient safety or for some reason would cause, you know, some type of challenge to patient safety. So shut off the PC, stop it from spreading. It's not going to affect anything. It's not going to cause a problem. Drop a call to your IT organization immediately. Tell them that you may have ransomware. You think you saw something that looked like ransomware. And then have the IT response team roll out and deal with this problem and try to determine if you've gotten it too far. One thing I've told you throughout this presentation is you do have time. The only reason that time will work in your favor is if your user population knows what to look for. Well, first of all, what not to click on or what not to interact with. Two, if they do interact with it and something happens, what to do immediately after that. And three, that you've taken time to educate them. In terms of defensive tactics that you can put in place, very mature anti-phishing program campaign. Anti-phishing campaigns work. They do reduce the incident of your users clicking on things they shouldn't click, but they have to be extremely realistic. I've seen too often where people tout statistics. We then look at the emails they've been using in the campaign, and frankly, nobody is going to click on them anyway. Most people in this day and age know they don't have family members in Haiti who've inherited millions of dollars from gold mines in South Africa. So using those kind of emails doesn't work. Using emails in phishing campaigns that appear to come from HIMS, appear to come from vendors in the industry, appear to come from Groupon, are very effective in determining just where you are in a phishing program in terms of susceptibility. So really maturing your anti-phishing programs is very, very strong practice. Do an availability assessment. If you get hit by this, you really want to understand, you know, where your backups live. Are they on the network? Are they off? Are they segmented? Can you really recover from backups? So my suggestion, find somebody, if you can do it in your organization or a third party, that can do a backup assessment for you. We don't do them, but it is a very strong practice. We are not partnered with Veeam. Veeam doesn't know who we are. We have no connection to Veeam whatsoever, but I will tell you that they have an amazingly cool backup solution. If you're looking to evolve your backup capabilities and your recovery capabilities as an organization, go take a look at Veeam. You can't say enough positive things about them. We don't get endorsed for it. I'm not selling you on it. I'm really just trying to help you understand where there's someone that can provide a set of technologies that really seems to make sense. You have to patch your servers. I'm hoping that what I showed you with SamSam shows you that just having a couple servers unpatched with stuff that you may not even know that's running can cause all kinds of havoc. And so you got to patch them. If you're being asked by your board or senior management, what can we do? Educate, patch servers. It's just that. There's no real other magic here. Snort and some of the antivirus vendors do now have signatures to prevent SamSam from getting into a network and going unchecked. So make sure that your IDS, IPS, and antivirus systems have the latest signatures. In this world we live in today, you have got to have your signature profiles up to date. There just cannot be a lapse. In terms of incident response, if you don't have a cyber incident response team, you really should get one or contract with someone that can provide a team in an emergency. They need to be trained. We too often see cyber incident response teams who are called a cyber incident response team for a healthcare organization. We start talking to them, we realize they haven't had any training in over a year or 2 years or never. And then they never do simulations. They never actually go out and practice stuff and get things thrown at them. This is kind of like a SWAT team who never ever, practices entering into a home under an emergency circumstance. That you would never ever do that as a SWAT team. Your cyber incident response team is the SWAT team for your hospital. You have to arm them with the right tools and the right training in order to be effective so when this happens. And I'll show you a little bit of a diagram of something that makes cyber incident response teams different in healthcare than pretty much any other industry. If you do become the victim of this, please contact the FBI. Call them immediately, even if it's limited to one desktop. It's important that we help them gain as much intelligence as possible if we're ever kind of focus on this and finally get it shut down. But don't negotiate on your own. Two myths that I often hear is I'll hear people say, well, we'll just get a removal tool. We see them on Google. I'll be very frank with you. If you go on Google and you do like a Locky removal or a SamSam removal and you download something, you're probably downloading more malware. I don't know of any way that you can remove encryption once it's happened. If you do know of a way, if you found someone who's developed that tool, please have them get in touch with me so I can introduce them to some friends at the NSA, because they would be very interested to figure out how you're doing that. The other thing I've heard is people want to develop a library of keys where you can, somehow, if you get encrypted, you can go somewhere and get a bunch of keys and decrypt. Again, that's probably not the most practical thing. It'd be an amazing library of keys, and I don't know how you'd know what key to use, but in any case, these things are myths. The only real work here is to really educate users, make sure that you've patched your servers, and then go from there. And I'm going to revisit this in a checklist format for you in a moment. Cybersecurity response team, if you don't have one, you probably want to put one together that's about 8 to 12 people max. They should have somewhat of a quasi-technical background. They have to be empowered to make decisions. It can't be a situation where people are picking up the phone and asking permission to do things all the time. Not to get off topic, but we're starting to see situations where you can actually pay more premium in cyber liability insurance if your cyber response team doesn't have the authority to shut down systems. So things are becoming very serious about how cyber response teams work. When it comes to things like ransomware, you need a cyber response team that can move quickly and contain the situation as quickly as possible. There's a chart here that shows a variety of team members from different parts of the organization that should be on your cyber incident response team. You don't want a situation where it's just the IT team. That's a very low-level team. It needs to be cross-functional, and the entire team needs to be trained and undergo simulation and practice so they know how to respond in a real situation. One thing, if you do come under attack and you do have ransomware and you've either contained it or you're trying to make decisions around it, one of the things we are trying to get people to embrace is kind of this coordinated risk scoring. What this means is that you have people from the clinical part of the house, the operational part, and the technical part of your organization working together to understand the threat, score the threat from 1 to 10, understand the impact to patient safety, score that 1 to 10, and impact to workflow. Now, this can also be used for remediation. You've already been hit. What's the remediation going to be in terms of impact to patient safety and workflow, and then come up with an agreed-upon action. This is a very simple tool to use. We make it simple because when you're in these situations, you don't need very complicated models or matrices to try and think through. We just need to get people talking and moving forward so that we can contain the situation and get you back to normal as soon as possible. Here's a checklist. HIS Talk has asked us to kind of move this into an Excel format, so we're going to do that, and we'll get that out to you with the materials. We'll probably add a few more things to here and some explanation. But the basic tactics, if you want to do basic tactics, it's basically targeted education. Think about that drop roll protocol. Update all your devices, servers, routers, appliances, devices, keep them up to date. Implement an emergency hotline. If you do have stop, drop, and roll in terms of a protocol implemented, your user needs to have somewhere they can call right away, right? Because you want whoever answers their phone say, did you disconnect your PC and get it shut down if they forgot to do that. Implement a cross-functional incident response team. Revisit your backup strategy. Make sure it's up to date using the latest capabilities out there, and separate your backup files onto a separate system or network. I didn't put this in here and I forgot. Number one thing I hear about the concern around encrypting or attacking medical devices, your number one solution, move that to a segmented network. I know it's difficult for some people and some organizations, but if you have your medical devices on the same network as you have everything else, you are certainly asking for a lot of trouble. So you need to find a way to move them, and as a very basic tactic to a separate subnet or separate network altogether. Advanced tactics you can do, implement a SOC or implement proactive monitoring, and believe it or not, I would consider an advanced tactic in this industry, training the incident response team to be a real incident response team. Some resources for you. First and foremost is a call to arms. As an industry, we need to be doing more of this. We need to have more industry organizations truly focused on cybersecurity from a holistic perspective and sharing information, and doing so without really a profit motive behind it. So as those of you that are on the phone from healthcare organizations, I implore you to just really get serious about what's going on and understand you can fight back. It's not about being a victim. You can shut down phishing campaigns effectively. You can patch servers and get them up there. I know it's not easy. I'm not saying it is. I know it's not the cheapest thing to do, but you do have avenues that you can pursue. And so hoping some of that came clear in this presentation. You can reach out to us, or one thing I'll mention that's aside from this, we've started a nonprofit organization. There's a variety, about 13 hospitals that belong to it now. VMware is on it. Really appreciate them being on it with us, and Divergent, AirWatch, and some others. It's the Medical Device Cybersecurity Task Force. You're free to join it. It's an open source group. Any of the best practices coming out of that group will be made available to the industry for free. We can certainly use more help on that group. So if you're interested in being part of defining that, please just go to our website, find the link for it, and join. And it's free. So it's not anything there that is going to cost you money, but you'll hopefully get a lot back in return. So that's kind of everything I had. I'm more than happy to take some questions. Hopefully, and my purpose today wasn't to scare people at all, just to kind of say, here's what it is, here's what we're seeing, and hopefully in a very small way to give you some suggestions that may help you as you go forward. So with that, Lori.
Thanks, John. As John said, we'd like to open it up to the audience for questions now. As a reminder, please use the questions section on the GoToWebinar panel to submit them. The first question, Steve admits that he's not a technical guru, but he'd like to know from a prevention perspective, are there ways to isolate servers on the network to prevent unauthorized access?
There certainly are. The challenge is always, even if you do that, how do attackers not find ways around it? But it is a great first step that if your network, your servers are not isolated in terms of their configuration and their deployment, this should be something you're considering.
For the low and slow, does it create the recovery information files at the point of encryption, or does it wait?
That's a really, really good question. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm suspecting that it may wait. If I was doing the attack myself, I would wait because I'd want to minimize the information that I broadcast out to people that may be looking for those things. So I don't know exactly if in like a SamSam situation how they're doing it. But if I was doing that attack, I would probably wait.
Okay. Bruce would like to know what an AV signature is.
Sorry, antivirus.
Okay. Do you see any specific types of files being attacked, MS, SQL, Java, etc.?
No, we haven't seen anything like a manifest where somebody's saying go after these, or having any intelligence to say, hey, you know, I want to go after the Epic database, and I know this is what it's normally named. We have not seen that, thankfully. It's just been, you know, kind of random and victims of opportunity, or files of opportunity, if you will.
For the low and slow, are you recommending more frequent backup and longer retention?
Yeah, I mean, I would recommend more frequent backups, simply because if you do get hit, you probably aren't going to want to go back. You know, you're not going to be able to go back very far. You're going to need to have as close to your hit point as possible. But the bigger thing that I would recommend, and maybe I didn't say this, is to test your backups to make sure you can recover from them more frequently. Because often, you know, you do have, most places will have policies in place that say, hey, we test our backups every so often. I would be testing those more and more. And that test probably has to be something where you're actually using the backup file, not your user population, but part of the backup recovery script should be actually making sure that you can interact with that file. Because if you find files that are corrupted or encrypted, you're going to have a very clear indication that there's something going on.
Karen would like to know, if your network is behind a firewall, is that adequate protection to not broadcast your unpatched server status, or is that not enough?
It's probably not enough, because things like your portals, which is kind of what they're going after right now, the JBoss stuff, and some other things may broadcast even so if you're behind the firewall. So I would say it's not enough. You know, the other thing is, most attackers today, if will circumvent your firewall. We all know that the firewall's there. Firewalls are a pain to try to channel through, so it's easier to go around them, find another way into your organization. And it could be just as easy as knocking out your Wi-Fi, or getting somebody to download an attachment, and then that attachment creates a command and control session back to us. So it's certainly not enough.
Have you seen attempts to encrypt cloud-based backups, for example, Amazon's S3?
We have seen very lightweight attempts at it. We haven't seen it become a you know, prolific type of attack, but we are seeing ransomware attacks go across local files, network files, and then move up to cloud files. Now, just so you know, when we say that about going to cloud files, it's usually because you have some kind of persistent connection to that cloud provider, and it's just happenstance in terms of how the ransomware gets there. So again, we haven't seen it proliferate. We have seen some small examples of it.
Victor would like to know if the use of zero-day or other AV software would be recommended or even relevant.
I'd have to know more about what's meant by zero-day, but I mean, anything you can do to get your antivirus or intrusion detection or intrusion prevention systems to be, you know, relevant. The more up to date they are, the better. So if a zero-day attack comes out, meaning it's the first time we've ever seen it, and you have a vendor or a product that is really good at getting zero-day information, you would be out of the game as best as possible.
Why is putting medical devices on a subnet helpful? Can't they still ping them and infiltrate them?
It's a much broader discussion, but what we recommend is if you move into a separate subnet, find a way to do some type of internal site-to-site VPN, specifically between the applications that are requiring to interact with those devices, and so you reduce your attack surface. You should hopefully also be developing the network architecture so that that device is not pingable or reachable from the other network, if at all possible. So it's a little bit, you know, and I don't have time to really go deep into it, but there's a little more to segmenting the networks. But the net is you want to kind of segment them off and try to find a way to air gap them as best as possible, or use some type of VPN between the apps that need them and keep them away from the apps that don't.
Are all platforms vulnerable?
In some way, shape, or form, yes. I mean, I'm assuming you mean to ransomware, and you know, they are pretty much. I mean, we're right now seeing a lot of Windows environments, but I don't know if that's anything to do with Windows other than we just use Windows a lot in healthcare. So,
If an attack is initiated via JBoss, how do they get Windows credentials to run the scripts? Is it done through JBoss?
Yeah, typically what I'm assuming is they're doing is they're either finding something within the environment that allows them to get those Windows credentials and then escalate up, or using the facilities within JBoss to connect back to the Active Directory environment that JBoss is authenticating off of that.
If one computer is impacted, then do they broadcast it and encrypt all other computers on the LAN or not?
Depends on the attack. They can, and we have seen multiple. It's why you've seen outages like Hollywood and MedStars, because we see the attack spread. SamSam is designed to spread, to go after, or go across the network. So when you see things like SamSam, it will proliferate out.
Can ransomware spread via RDP traffic?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, as long as you can establish a communication session, then anything you can move over that channel would work, right? Because what's happening is you're going to move the files over some type of communication channel and then execute the executable on the other side of that channel. So I don't know if it would do anything to prevent it.
If they attack a server and I have my website code on that server as well, then do they encrypt the website code files along with what's on the server?
Yeah, more than likely every file you have is going to be encrypted. And like if you look at SamSam, right, so even if your web files were being used, and so they will kill that proc, and that will shut down that file and make it read-writable, so they would then encrypt it at that point.
Karen just wants to clarify that when their enterprise is pinged, they can't really do anything about that, but listening to you, she says that she understands that those pings are someone sniffing around looking for a vulnerability. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be. It's an early indicator. So, you know, we kind of broadening the topic a little bit, but one thing that I often suggest to people is look at your web logs, and I don't mean that from a security perspective, but look at your web logs and find out where people are visiting your website from. And if you're seeing like a lot of people from outside the country or some other states and you don't do any kind of real business in those states, you should probably start thinking a little bit. Your spider sense should be going up. And pings are an early indicator. So if we do an attack, for instance, if you hired us to do a pen test, first thing we do is start gathering intelligence, and that starts on your website. Once we do that, we start pinging or mapping your networks. And other attackers do the same thing. So if you're seeing pings from places, you should definitely start getting a little concerned. But it's hard. You're going to be pinged for legitimate reasons too. So I don't want to make it sound too simplistic, but it is a good practice to figure out why.
Is microsegmentation a good practice, leveraging SDN technologies like network virtualization?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I would tell you anything you can do to do containerization. Software-defined networks are a phenomenal technology that, although aren't ubiquitous yet, really is something healthcare as a whole needs to look at. I mean, it is for those of you who don't know what SDN means, it's software-defined networking, and it's a really, really important technology that will make a huge difference in terms of how you can manage your networks and protect yourselves.
Great. Well, we're out of time, so that's going to have to be our last question. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you, John, for yet another very informational and interesting presentation. Attendees, watch your email for links to the recording of today's webinar, as well as a PDF version of the PowerPoint presentation, and John is going to make that checklist available to us as well, so I'll attach that to the email. I want to thank you all for attending. We look forward to seeing you at our next HIS Talk webinar, and I hope you all have a nice weekend.